silence, regret, and a single moment that revealed everything she had been hiding. When she sat down for what would become her final interview, it wasn't the fiery redhead audiences remembered. It was a woman carrying the weight of a lifetime, success, heartbreak, and the feeling of being left behind by the world she helped build. What she said that day left everyone in the room and millions watching in tears. The lonely queen of comedy. By 1989, Lucille Ball's name was still legendary, but her life no longer felt that way. The woman who once commanded 44 million viewers every Monday night was living in quiet isolation. Her Beverly Hills mansion, once full of laughter and guests, had grown cold. Most of her old friends were gone. Her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., lived far away and rarely visited. And though her second husband, Gary Morton, stayed by her side, he often spoke of the sadness that lingered in the air, the kind that fame and fortune could never erase. Lucille had been America's sweetheart, a symbol of joy, but behind closed doors, she was haunted by the past. The end of life with Lucy in 1986 had crushed her spirit. She had come out of retirement, hoping to remind the world that she still had it. Instead, the show was cancelled after only 8 episodes. For the first time in her career, audiences didn't laugh. Critics called it a painful farewell. Friends said Lucy took it personally, that she stayed up at night rereading the reviews, wondering if the magic was gone forever. It was more than just a failed show. It was a sign of something deeper. That time had moved on and Hollywood had forgotten its queen. The comedians she once inspired now ruled television, but few ever called to check in. The woman who once broke barriers for female performers now sat alone, watching reruns of I Love Lucy in her living room. Every so often, she'd laugh softly, then wipe a tear away. Physically, she was fading too. Years of smoking had damaged her lungs, and by 1988, heart trouble began to show. Still, she refused to admit weakness. "I'm fine," she'd insist to her nurse, even when she could barely walk to the kitchen. When friends urged her to slow down, she replied, "I don't know how to stop." That stubbornness had built her career. But now, it was all she had left. The early heartbreaks that shaped her. Lucille Desiree Ball was born on August 6, 1911 in Jamestown, New York. A small-town girl who would one day rule Hollywood. But her childhood was anything but joyful. When she was only 3 years old, tragedy struck. Her father, Henry Ball, a telephone lineman, fell ill with typhoid fever. In the final weeks of his life, he was climbing poles in the snow trying to fix tangled wires during a storm. His health failed fast. On February 28, 1915, he died, just 27 years old. Lucille's memories of that day never left her. She remembered her mother crying, a picture falling off the wall, and a small bird trapped inside the house. That image of the bird terrified her for the rest of her life. From that moment, she developed a deep fear of birds, not just the real ones, but pictures or even patterns that resembled them. Friends later said she would refuse to stay in hotel rooms if there was bird wallpaper. To Lucy, that memory was more than superstition. It was grief she could never shake. Her mother, Day, was young and overwhelmed, pregnant with Lucille's little brother, Fred. To survive, she sent Lucille to live with relatives while she tried to rebuild their lives. Lucy grew up feeling displaced, like a guest in her own family. When her mother remarried a man named Ed Peterson, things didn't get easier. His parents were strict and cold, banning mirrors in the house so the children wouldn't grow vain. Lucy would later say those years taught her how to act, how to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. Then came another tragedy that changed everything. When Lucy was 12, her stepfather set up a target practice area in the backyard. He was careful, but one day an accident happened. A young neighbor boy was shot by mistake. The bullet hit his spine and left him paralyzed. The boy's family sued and won. The Balls lost everything, their home, their furniture, even their insurance. Lucy's grandfather, consumed by guilt, never worked again. She said later, "One accident destroyed us." the rise and the pain behind I Love Lucy. By the time Lucille Ball reached her late 20s, she had already faced more rejection than success. Her dream of acting began in New York, but it was crushed early when her teachers at the John Murray Anderson School for the Dramatic Arts told her she had no talent. One instructor even sent her home, telling her mother not to waste money on lessons. Years later, Lucy would remember that humiliation as the turning point that made her tougher. "All I learned there," she once said, "was how to be frightened." But she didn't quit. She went back to New York in 1928, took modeling jobs to survive, and eventually moved west to Hollywood. In the 1930s, she became known around studios as the Queen of the B-movies. She appeared in more than 75 films, usually as a chorus girl, a sidekick, or the woman who never got the spotlight. Still, she never stopped learning. Each set taught her timing, posture, and control. The camera loved her even when the industry didn't. Then, in 1940, her life changed forever. During the filming of Too Many Girls, she met a young Cuban musician named Desi Arnaz. He was confident, charming, and unpredictable. They met on set, danced together during breaks, and within months eloped in Connecticut. Everyone said it wouldn't last. And in many ways they were right. Desi drank heavily, stayed out late, and had a wandering eye. Lucy, who had spent her whole life craving stability, found herself in chaos once again. But she loved him deeply and believed that if they worked together, maybe they could save each other. That belief gave birth to I Love Lucy. In 1951, when CBS offered to adapt Lucy's radio show, My Favorite Husband, into a TV series, she insisted that Desi play her on-screen husband. The network resisted, claiming audiences wouldn't accept an interracial couple. Lucy refused to compromise. To prove them wrong, she and Desi created a live vaudeville tour. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and CBS finally gave in. The show became a phenomenon. Every Monday night, the nation stopped to watch Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. At its peak, I Love Lucy pulled in 44 million viewers, more people than watched the president's address. Lucy's comic genius, her willingness to humiliate herself for a laugh, and her perfect timing made her the face of television comedy. But behind the laughter, her marriage was falling apart. Desi's infidelity continued, and Lucy's heart broke a little more with each rumor she tried to ignore. When the cameras rolled, they were America's perfect couple. When the lights went off, she cried alone. It wasn't easy being married to Desi Arnaz. She once said it was always the same booze and broads. Yet she stayed hoping that love could survive fame. For a while it did. But when I Love Lucy ended in 1957, the cracks in their marriage were too deep to hide. The world had fallen in love with Lucy and Ricky, but the real Lucille Ball was quietly falling apart. The Red Scare and public humiliation. In the early 1950s, America was gripped by fear, the kind that could destroy reputations overnight. It was the era of Senator Joseph McCarthy and the Hollywood blacklist, when even the faintest link to communism could end a career. For Lucille Ball, whose show was the most watched on television, that fear suddenly came crashing into her life in 1953. It began with a rumor. Gossip columnist Walter Winchell hinted on his radio show that a famous red-headed actress had once been a communist. He didn't say her name, but everyone knew who he meant. The next morning, newspapers across the country printed headlines in red ink. Lucille Ball named red. In a single day, America's most beloved comedian had become a national suspect. The accusation came from a decision Lucy had made nearly 20 years earlier. Back in 1936, she had registered to vote as a member of the Communist Party, not out of ideology, but out of love for her grandfather, a man with strong socialist beliefs. "He wanted me to do it to please him," she later said. "So I did." She never attended meetings, never discussed politics, and quickly forgot about it. But now, in the hysteria of the Cold War, that long-forgotten choice threatened everything she had built. For Lucy, the timing couldn't have been worse. I Love Lucy was in the middle of filming a new season, and sponsors like Philip Morris were terrified. Millions of dollars were at stake. If audiences turned on her, the empire she and Desi had built, Desilu Studios, could collapse overnight. Lucille decided to face it head-on. She voluntarily met with investigators from the House Un-American Activities Committee, known for its brutal interrogations of actors, writers, and directors. Calmly, she explained everything, that she had registered only to make her grandfather happy, that she never voted as a communist, and that she had nothing to hide. "I have never been a communist," she declared. "I have never been involved in anything subversive in my life." While the public waited for her downfall, Desi took action. He invited reporters to their home and spoke directly to the audience before the live taping of a new I Love Lucy episode. Standing center stage, he said, "The only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate." Then, to everyone's surprise, he announced that he had spoken with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who confirmed that Lucille Ball was cleared of all suspicion. The crowd erupted into applause. The family breakdown, scandals, and decline of health. After I Love Lucy ended in 1957, Lucille Ball was the most powerful woman in television. She and Desi owned Desilu Productions, the studio behind future classics like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. But the success that had once held their marriage together now tore it apart. Their fights were loud, cruel, and constant. Lucille once said, "We weren't fighting for love anymore. We were fighting to survive." On March 3, 1960, just one day after Desi's birthday and the filming of their final episode together, she filed for divorce. 2 months later, their 20-year marriage was officially over. Their split shocked the world. To millions of fans, they were still Lucy and Ricky, the couple that made America believe in laughter. But behind the camera, Lucille had been living through years of betrayal, drinking, and emotional exhaustion. Desi later admitted, "I caused it. My drinking, my temper. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me." Despite it all, they remained tied together by love and business. Lucy bought out his shares of Desilu for $2.5 million, becoming the first woman to run a major Hollywood studio. But personal peace never followed. In 1961, Lucille married comedian Gary Morton, a kind and patient man 13 years younger than her. They stayed together until her death, but it was never quite the same love she had for Desi. She once told a friend, "Gary gave me stability, but Desi gave me fire." Even as she moved on, she never truly let go of her first husband. Her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., grew up under the heavy shadow of fame. Lucy pursued acting while Desi Jr. struggled with addiction and tabloid scandals. In the early 1970s, his romance with actress Patty Duke created chaos in the press. When Duke became pregnant, rumors spread that Desi Jr. was the father. Lucille was devastated. She saw it as a public humiliation that dragged her family name through the mud. Though a DNA test years later proved otherwise, the damage had already been done. Lucy withdrew further into herself, focusing on work and trying to keep the family's image intact. Then came another heartbreak. Vivian Vance, her longtime co-star and best friend, was diagnosed with cancer. Lucy stayed in touch until the very end. When Vivian passed away in 1979, Lucille was inconsolable. "Part of me died with her," she said quietly to Carol Burnett, who had become one of her closest remaining friends. The final phone call, Desi's letter, and the last interview. In November 1986, Lucille Ball received the phone call she had been dreading for months. Desi Arnaz, the man who had once been her partner in love, work, and history, was dying. Lung cancer had taken hold and he had little time left. Despite decades of separation, Lucy never stopped caring for him. She called often, sent letters, and in those final days flew down to Del Mar to see him one last time. Their daughter Lucy later remembered how tender those visits were. The laughter, the tears, the quiet moments of forgiveness. On November 30th, their wedding anniversary, Lucy phoned him again. Lucy held the receiver to her father's ear. "Say what you want to say," she told her mother. All Lucy could manage were 3 words, the same 3 that had connected them from the beginning. "I love you." She said it again and again. Desi, weak but alert, whispered back, "I love you too, honey. Good luck with your show." 2 days later, on December 2, 1986, Desi Arnaz died at age 69. For Lucy, it was as if the last light in her life had gone out. Just 5 days after his death, Lucille attended the Kennedy Center Honors in Washington, D.C. She had planned to skip it, but her family convinced her to go. Midway through the ceremony, actor Robert Stack walked onto the stage holding a letter. It was from Desi. He had written it just days before he died, knowing she would be honored that week. Stack began to read. "The New York Times asked me to divide the credit for I Love Lucy between the writers, the directors, and the cast. I told them, give Lucy 90% of the credit and divide the other 10% among the rest of us. Lucy was the show. Viv, Fred, and I were just props. Damn good props, but props nevertheless. P.S. I Love Lucy was never just a title." As the letter was read, the camera cut to Lucy. Her hands trembled, her eyes filled with tears. Gary Morton, her second husband, held her hand tightly while President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan looked on. For the first time in public, Lucille Ball, the woman who made millions laugh, broke down and cried. Everyone in the theater did the same. It was the most fitting tribute imaginable. Desi's last words to Lucy, a love letter disguised as a goodbye. A few years later, in 1989, Lucy gave her final television interview. Her face was thinner, her voice softer, but her humor still sharp. When asked what she wanted to be remembered for, she paused, then said quietly, "For making people happy." The room fell silent. She smiled faintly and added, "That's all I ever wanted." It was a simple answer, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. Months later, she suffered a heart attack, underwent surgery, and briefly seemed to recover.